It was the beginning of a new entry into a deeper spiritual life and a deeper apostolic awareness and commitment. So he began to meet a different class of people, a different side of society. With the St. Vincent de Paul, they used to visit the tenement buildings, the projects, I guess you call them here, in Dublin. And the poverty was desperate back then. Really, people had so little, probably hadn't shoes on their feet, so little to eat, barely a roof over their heads, very little work, desperate poverty, large families, squalor, dirt, vermin, just horrible, horrible conditions all over Dublin. Now, Frank hadn't been exposed to this to any level. He would have been aware of it, but never really exposed to it. So his membership of the St. Vincent de Paul Society suddenly awakened him to the reality of the poverty and destitution all around him. And this struck him very deeply. And he began to see what he could do. And he got very involved in the St. Vincent de Paul. Some of the men in the group with him were very apostolic in their own way too, and he learned a great deal from them. Some of them even went on to become priests themselves later on. But this organization certainly helped Frank on his road to conversion, you might say, from being, say, a regular Catholic, what you might say an average Catholic, to becoming a normal Catholic, that is, a Catholic who's living fully their faith with apostolic zeal. So this time now Frank is undergoing this conversion, you might say. So here he is among friends, typically 1917. Again, this is remember, keep in mind the Legion was started in 1921. This is before the Legion ever began. And so he's quite a wide circle of friends there, and very popular among them. He's second from the right there again with the moustache in that picture, and smiling there. So, you can see he was obviously a sociable person, not shy or retiring in any way, but and affable too in his own way. Very quickly, or very soon after 1913, Frank Duff, he decided to go to Mass every day for Lent. And in his inimitable style, end of Lent came, and he said, well, might as well keep going now, really. I started, so this is a good thing. We'll just stay with it. And so he continued going to daily Mass and never missed daily Mass. At least one, if not two, daily Masses every day, right until he was in the last day of his life. He had attended 2 Masses that very day. Such again was his love for the Holy Eucharist. He began to develop an intense life of prayer, and in these early years, 1913, 14, 15, and so on, used to spend as many as 3 or 4 hours a day in prayer. Obviously the Lord was kind of drawing him into something very deep, and Frank, being the kind of zealous and well able to apply himself, follow that call. So at any rate, Frank in his work in the St. Vincent de Paul came in contact with the poor of the city. And he saw that not only were they materially poor, but they were spiritually destitute as well. And he saw, look, these people need spiritual help. They need prayer in their lives. They need some hope in their desperate poverty. They need something to hold on to. And so Frank began bringing holy medals and prayer cards and trying to supply for the spiritual needs as well as the material needs. And the Vincent de Paul Society is solely associated really with material relief. Okay, there's an element of the spiritual there, but strictly it's material relief. So obviously a seed was beginning to grow, this spiritual need that was there. One thing the Vincent de Paul came across, they received a letter that, look, here in Dublin, there's at this time, during the second decade there, in Dublin there was a lot of what they called proselytizing going on. There was Protestant sects moving in and inviting people to come to like a soup kitchen or breakfast on a Sunday morning, but the deal was in order to get food they'd have to listen to Protestant teaching, and it was a way of trying to convert them, but it was like really a perverted way of trying to convert people. There was no freedom there. They were playing on the needs of the people in order to try to bring them around. And many of them were Catholics who used to go there. They were just so poor and so hungry, and they needed warmth and comfort and food, and so many of them would go there. So Frank realized this was happening, and he went down to this place, 6.5 White Friar Street it was called, little place where some of the Protestants, I guess Church of Ireland, had their meeting hall, and he used to try to canvass people on the way in and to say, look, you shouldn't do this. And he'd pray the rosary in between clients, as it were, and he tried to win them away from it, and it was kind of hopeless. But somebody came up to him and said, well, you know, there's somebody else who's trying to do the same thing you are, and it's this man Gabbett, and he has another soup kitchen, this time a Catholic soup kitchen that he's running. Why don't you team up with him? So he went to team up with Gabbett, and they got together. He was a tough soldier, a tough man, and they got on great. And so Frank started sending people up to Gabbett's soup kitchen. And interestingly, the first thing Gabbett did when he opened up his soup kitchen, he put a little altar with a statue of Our Lady of Grace on it and some flowers. And it's that very same statue that was the first Legion Presidium meeting statue. It was almost as if the Lord was slowly allowing the seed to take root and to establish itself. Frank himself tells various stories or encounters he had on this work. One particular sailor who was drunk didn't particularly like Frank telling him not to go into the soup kitchen, so he came at Frank with a knife. And he wasn't expecting this at all. This is the last thing that he was holding his rosary and just trying to encourage the man. But the man must have been a bit too much the worse for drink, kind of staggered a bit, and Frank was able to sidestep him. And he said, the punch I gave that man would have done Muhammad Ali justice, that he floored him. And he felt justified in doing that because his life was obviously at risk. And there were other occasions too, and Frank himself says that he was given supernatural strength. He's only a low-sized man, kind of like Alfie Lambe, only a short man, but he was given extraordinary strength when he needed it. So at any rate, the proselytizing was the beginning of this idea of opening up to the spiritual needs of people. And really that was the seed to beginning the Legion of Mary. What happened around 1917, Frank with some of his friends were reading the True Devotion to Mary and St. Louis Marie de Montfort's True Devotion. And Frank took it up and he read it, and now he says, I can't understand this, makes no sense at all. So he took up it again, he said, I'll give it another chance. No, couldn't, no way. And it took about 6 times before finally the penny dropped. And really it comes back to Frank's sense of purpose, because just going back a few years earlier than that, 1916, Frank had written that little pamphlet, Can We Be Saints? This little one here, and I think you hope you have a copy of that as well, worth reading and rereading and rereading. And in that pamphlet, he speaks about Our Lady. This is before now he's ever read the True Devotion, or before the Legion of Mary. And you can see the insight that he has. And he says to read and pray again in order to get that love for Our Lady that we should have. And he says that in here. And that's ever before now the True Devotion comes around. And so he picks up the True Devotion and he doesn't let go. And it does take a little bit of persuasion from friends, but finally the penny drops. So he gathers around him some of his friends, and they have these little discussion groups, and they talk about the True Devotion, and they say, okay, what are we going to do about this now? Now are we going to need to live this out and consecrate ourselves to Our Lady? Where to from here? So they arranged to have a meeting, and it was about a couple of weeks before the 7th of September, 1921, and they sat down and discussed the True Devotion to Mary. And it was in this St. Vincent de Paul house, Myra House, and they just sat around and discussed it, and they had this habit of finishing at 6 o'clock with the Angelus. And so that discussion kind of ended, but they fixed another date for a meeting and said, okay, now we've got to put this into action. And really it was from there that the Legion was born, and somebody had the idea to set up an altar, and it just started. Like Frank says, it wasn't premeditated, it wasn't, the handbook wasn't written and then they got going. It was they just started. And they said, okay, what do we put ourselves at Our Lady's disposal, and now what do we do?